Every year on this week of the year, we read an apocalyptic reading. So stay tuned for next year's reading. Today we get Luke's little apocalypse. That's what we call it. And for being considered little, it actually has a lot of stuff in it. So we're going to try to unpack this reading a little bit. Now, we tend to think of apocalypses as predictions of the future, right? Of the end of the world, which isn't wholly accurate to its biblical text. Here, Jesus says that the temple will be destroyed. There will be wars and famines and issues in various places, false prophets, etc. So if you think about those things, they're not really super specific predictions of anything, really. Everything that human beings make eventually breaks down, right? Nothing lasts forever. And we were all fighting long before Jesus was born, and we have continued to do so. And natural disasters occur, sometimes just because they occur naturally, but a lot of times because we cause them ourselves. So as far as predictions of end of times, this isn't actually a very good one. And we also have to note that Luke wrote this story in 85, the year 85, which is 15 years after the temple actually was destroyed already by the Romans. So we have a prediction that the Romans are going to destroy the temple, but also they already know it happened already. So David Lose explains it this way. He says that apocalyptic passages were offered to help believers struggling from oppression and persecution put their struggles into the larger context of the universal struggle between God and the forces of evil. And in this way, such passages provided comfort that no matter how difficult things became, God would not abandon them. So this doom and gloom passage is actually kind of more of a promise of hope. Now, if you look at the reading that took place right before this reading, we always, when we do studies, we recommend that if you're reading a section, you have to check out what happened before and after, just to get a little context. So the story right before this is the widow's mite. We all know that one, right? The poor widow puts her last 2 coins into the temple collection plate. She probably won't have enough money to eat for a while, but she paid her pledge. And that leads to the day's story, where the disciples are marveling at how beautiful the temple is. And Jesus must have been thinking, do these guys even listen to me when I talk? I mean, geez. Because the temple back then was a corrupted system. King Herod was the one who spent everybody's money on it. And he wasn't even really Jewish. He was appointed by Rome. So he would take all the money and beautify the temple to glorify himself, not God necessarily. So they were torn over it because the temple was the center of their lives, but then it was being run by somebody who was very corrupt and brutal towards them. So they didn't really know what to make of it. So Jesus tells them today not to make an idol out of the building. Now, the Gospel of Luke overall is concerned with helping the poor. And adorning a building with jewels doesn't necessarily help the poor, in Luke's view. And it will fall, just as all buildings do. But the important thing is that God's presence won't disappear with the building. God's presence will stay. So Jesus says that in the midst of all of their persecution and the craziness of the world, they should stay true to God like God stays true to them. And then speak out for God's presence. This will give you an opportunity to testify, he says. Every opportunity is an opportunity to testify, really. Here in America, Christians are not persecuted. In other countries, there still are places where Christians are persecuted. But in America, no. No matter what someone on TV might tell you. The main problem here, I think, is not persecution necessarily. It's indifference. Many people can claim to be followers of Jesus, yet then turn around and spew bile and hatred against other humans for no reason, really, or ignore problems of the world that don't affect them directly, personally, right? That's the sin of indifference. Gilberto Ruiz explains this passage as this way. He says that this passage warns us about becoming too fixated on temporary human institutions, perhaps with the implication that we should attend to the poor in our communities instead, and it exhorts us to be firm in our trust in God when calamity and persecution strike. Despite its strong imagery of destruction, this is a passage mostly about hope. Hope that God remains present in the world, even if our lives have gotten bad, or it seems like the world is getting so bad and closing in on us, that God will still give us hope. So how does this help us lead a life following Jesus in the face of all of our challenges in the world? Well, the first and foremost thing, I think you're going to know what I'm going to say, is that we have to love. Truly love others, meaning also respecting other people. Not just people who are like us, who we agree with all the time, right? We have to have open dialogues with our neighbors and not just name call or yell or recite slogans back and forth at each other, which seems what most of our media has just started doing, right? We have to take the opportunity to testify, like Jesus tells us. Speak up for the oppressed. Jesus calls us to love and help. If you see someone being harassed or mistreated, we have to speak up about it. It starts with us. And if we don't actively counter hate with love, then we kind of are no better than the ones who spew the hate, honestly. That's the indifference I'm talking about. Now, we had convention this weekend, and Tori's going to give us a little talk about that later. But the bishop talked about a certain point. He said, coming to church, well, he didn't say this, I'm paraphrasing what he talked about. So coming to church is the beginning of our journey, not the end. It's only the start. One of the misunderstandings that the disciples have today too, you know? They say, we made it to the temple, and this is the place, and now we're done, and everything's great now. Actually, it's just the beginning. Our beautiful church and our beautiful music and our beautiful liturgy is not the end. It's not the end goal. It should be the inspiration and call to action for us to leave and go in the world, to do the work that Jesus wanted us to do. So it's just the start of our mission. The bishop talked about this, and I agree with him, but not just because he's my boss, but because I think he's right. So we should let our church and our beautiful jewels, I don't know if we have any jewels in here, but we have lots of shiny things and lovely accoutrement. We should let them inspire us and inspire us to spread hope in the world, to be inspired by God and act in the world, to spread the love and grace that we receive from our relationship with God to others in the world, and be beacons of hope in a time when it often seems pretty bleak out there. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.